This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is flyer number 414, entitled Masculists see Fluffie Feminists as Parasitic Hypocritical Genociders to be destroyed. Description. This flyer expresses the hatred of Masculists towards the parasitic, hypocritical genocide of the Fluffie Feminists, explaining why Masculists feel this way. When millions of men feel the same, as is likely, as Masculist ideas continue to spread around the world, then women will feel they have been hit by a bus, a Masculist bus, by a very angry, hateful, Masculist tsunami. Flyer itself. Masculists see Fluffie Feminists as parasitic, hypocritical genociders to be destroyed. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer tries to explain to a general audience why Masculists have such a contempt for Fluffy Feminists and why Masculists lash out at them with such venom when Fluffy Feminists make public statements that men oppress women, that men are toxic, etc. For those of you who are not already familiar with the Masculist terms used above, I begin with some definitions and a little bit of Masculist explanation. A fluffy, based on the word fluff, is a Masculist term for a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man. A fluffy feminist is a feminist who is not a FIP, that's financially independent person, who did not bother to get a career-competent education at high school and college, so that she is unable to earn a decent salary, so that she can't afford to buy her own middle-class house, so that she will go looking for some gullible manslave in her 30s when her biological clock is ticking hard, to pay for her to sit on her fat parasitic arse so she can stay at home to raise her kids, living in a middle-class house that he pays for, being a manslave to her, working for her for decades. Masculists know that it was men who liberated women from household drudgery by giving women the contraceptive pill, household gadgets, science-based medicine, female life expectancies well into the 80s, so that women, even those who stay at home for 6 years until their second child is off to kindergarten, have a career window of half a century, so women can work. Masculists say that now that women can work, they must work, since anything else is manslavery. To Masculists, fluffydom is manslavery, and manslavery is slavery, and slavery is hated. So Masculists have a real hatred for fluffies and fluffy parasites. It's bad enough that so many women are fluffies, not bothering to get a career-competent education so that they can be FIPs as adults, pulling their own financial weight, not parasiting off the money and labour of a man. But fluffy feminists are even worse, since they're not only fluffy parasites of men, but they are hypocrites as well, since they want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men, in brackets, in sharing with men the burdens of earning the living, in the divorce courts, by not bothering to accept equal obligations with men, in bothering to become FIPs, so that in the divorce courts, women behave as fluffy feminists, expecting men to pay for them after the divorce the way their manslave husbands did before the divorce. This fluffy feminist hypocrisy makes fluffy feminists hated by Masculists, so that when some fluffy feminists, and that includes nearly all feminists, since only very few feminists, in brackets at the time of writing, February 2021, have had their Masculist consciousness raised. That is, nearly all feminists are what the Masculists call monoconscious. That is, nearly all feminists are not bi-conscious. That is, they have not had both their feminist and their Masculist consciousnesses raised. And so, by default, they continue to hold their traditional expectations of men, seeing men as cash machines to be abused and robbed, especially in the divorce courts. Masculists are very aware that no culture that financially crucifies and destroys the lives of a quarter of its fathers, as happens in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, can survive intact. In many countries now, 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity, due to the toxicity of the divorce courts, taken over by the hated fluffy feminists in all their monoconscious hypocrisy, their parasitic hypocrisy. But masculists have a far greater hatred for the fluffy feminists because of the latter's indirect genocide. Because the fluffy feminists have made the divorce courts so toxic for men, brackets, for example, divorcing fathers will lose custody of their kids with a 90% probability. So young men are reasoning that if they marry and have kids, then they have a 1 in 4 chance of losing them, which to most young men are totally unacceptable odds. So they very understandably decide that modern marriage really sucks. So they decide to wipe their hands of marriage and paternity, which makes them direct genociders. A divorcing father will lose his house to his fluffy ex-wife, half his stuff and half of his wealth to her. He will be forced to make child payments to his kids, whom he will hardly see. And if his ex-wife is a real fluffy parasite, he may be forced to pay her alimony for life, with no legal nor moral obligation on her to get off her fat, parasitic ass and fip up. A fluffy ex-wife thus continues to parasite off the money and labour of her ex-husband after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. Of course, the child-minded feminazis will blame men for the crashing of the population size, whereas in fact it is the fluffy feminists who are the real culprits, since it is they who have made marriage and paternity such a shitty deal for men, that currently 2/3 of young men reject marrying and having kids. If this massive gender injustice in the divorce courts continues, then probably within a decade, the proportion of young men refusing to marry and have kids will be over 90%, in which case the population size will crash rapidly in a mere generation. Thus the masculists see fluffy feminists not only as parasitic and hypocritical, but far worse, as indirect genociders. This is so serious a situation that drastic measures are called for by the masculists to stop the catastrophic decline in the birth rate. Masculists have as their main political aim the fipping of women, that is, putting such powerful moral pressure on young women to fip up, that few young women will be able to withstand it. Within a mere few years, nearly all young male classmates at high school will have been influenced by masculist ideas, so that they look very closely at the level of fitness of a potential girlfriend. And if she looks to be a fluffy, or worse, a fluffy feminist, then that will be the kiss of death for her in terms of him seeing her as a potential girlfriend, as someone he could respect, because she is not making a genuine effort to fip up, and does not have the moral attitudes of an emo fip. That is, she does not feel equal moral obligations to be a fip, and does not feel ashamed being a fluffy, thus expecting to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man. So when masculists hear fluffy feminists haranguing men in public meetings, they explode in anger and bite the fucking heads off these fluffy feminists, yelling at them with real anger and hatred, telling them, for example, quote, "You fluffy feminists are truly hated by the masculists because you're seen as hypocritical, parasitic genociders. You want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but you reject equal obligations with men in the divorce courts. You misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi bitches have made divorce so toxic for men that now in many countries 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, refuse to be fathers. You fluffy feminists have become indirect genociders. You are indirectly wiping out whole populations, so you have to be stopped, with bullets if necessary. You women oppress men far worse than vice versa. The ways that men oppress women are relatively minor in comparison. You women have always been parasites of men. You couldn't hunt, you couldn't plough, you couldn't fight. You've always been parasitic of men. With your 10% smaller brains, you don't invent anything, build anything, create anything. We men, up till now, have only tolerated you women because of your two traditional monopolies of vagina and womb. We men are forced to be nice to you because we want to penis you. As women, your only real source of interest for men is your vagina. As men, we don't respect women for the simple reason that women are incapable of earning that male respect, since women's performance track record is hugely inferior to men's. Women lack genius. Women are dumber than men by 4 IQ points on average. Women have a 10% lower IQ variance, so the morons and the genii are males. Women have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes. This is the end of part 1.